Hi, good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to all our distinguished panel members in the audience today. We are here today for yet another discussion with our experts from the industry on compliance challenges and practices on how to deal with them. The world around us has changed rapidly in the last few years. The way Indians hail cabs, order food, make payments, watch movies, get educated, do online learning has changed like never before. Technology has literally penetrated our lives and is leading to enhanced convenience and reduced cost. The world of compliance is changing with technology rapidly as well. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting three esteemed panelists. We have with us Anusha Rajan. Anusha, can I request you to bring up your video? Anusha is a marketing controller at HMD Mobile India Private Limited and drives the compliance agenda over the last 15 years of professional experience, predominantly in internal audit, risk, control space, working with consulting firms, large multinational, multi-locational Indian and multinational organizations such as Deloitte, Haskins and Sells, Airtel, American Express, and Walmart. She is a graduate in commerce from Lady Shri Ram College and is a chartered accountant by qualification. Welcome, Anusha. Let me now introduce you to Anupama Pai. Anupama is with Bharat Serums and Vaccines Private Limited as the head of legal, compliance, and secretarial function. She comes with over 20 years of experience working with WNS Global Services, Merck subsidiaries in India, and ICICI Bank Limited. She has done her ACS, LLB, and Masters in Financial Management from Mumbai University. Welcome, Anupama. The third panelist that we have today is Priyanka Goswami. Priyanka is the Assistant Vice President and Line of Business Head at Niamo, a leader in global payroll and HR compliances. He works closely with over 100 clients, many of whom are Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies, and helps them manage their payroll and labor compliances. Priyanka brings over 15 years of experience working with companies such as Caliber Point and Hexaware Technologies. He's graduate engineer from Nagpur and has bagged many certifications from ISI, including Lean, Six Sigma Green Belt, ISO 27001, and ISO 9001 Internal Auditor. Welcome, everyone. We look forward to a great discussion today. Priyanka, can I request you to bring up your video? So let me kick off this discussion today by setting the tone, by sharing some key thoughts, and then I'll bring our panelists in. The world of compliance has changed rapidly in India. Let me take you back to the year 2013. Companies Act of 2013 came in. Governance, risk, and compliance became an essential agenda item on the boardrooms and board conversations. The cost of poor compliance went up. Provisions for criminal proceedings and jail term were brought into acts and compliances. What worked in India till that time didn't work after that. Governance, risk, and compliance became an essential agenda item on everyone's consciousness if they were in executive positions. What I'm sharing with you right now is a quick map of India's regulatory complexity that all compliance officers deal with. India has a universe of 1,536 acts, 69,233 compliances, which lead to about 6,618 filings overall across central, state, and local laws, out of which about 30% in terms of acts and 47% in terms of compliance comes from labor. You all know labor means labor laws. There are other categories like environment, health, and safety. Abhay, if I can request you to go back to the earlier slide, which deals with Environment Protection Act, solid waste management, e-waste management, hazardous waste management, air, water, soil pollution norms, PCBs, CPCBs, all of those fall under the environment, health, and safety. Finance and taxation deals with direct tax, indirect tax, customs, FEMA, and other kinds of compliances, including TCS, TDS, income tax, advanced tax, GST, and so on. Commercial deals with equipments. So any factory today deals with hoists, lifts, cranes, pressure vessels, boilers. They deal with tools, tackles, gas holders, weighing equipments. All of these have compliance implications. Secretarial, as the name suggests, deals with secretarial compliances, which are primarily event-based compliances. MCA, SEBI, ROC, NSE, BSE. And industry specific deal with regulatory compliances which pertain to industry specific regulators. So that's really a high level map of what India's compliance universe looks like. We have attempted to capture that, break it down by center and states. Let us show you the quick infographic. So this is a quick infographic. Certainly don't wish to delve deeper into it, but this talks about the compliance complexity at a state level in terms of acts, compliances, and filings. Moving on to the next one. When we talk about compliance, we deal with these items. So sometimes compliance can be a loaded word. It's important to make sure that we all speak the common language here. So when we talk compliance, we talk everything in statutory compliance space. So whether they are licenses, registrations, permissions, consent orders, various kinds of returns with various frequencies, registers, believe it or not, there are 48 different register types just within labor under about 17 or 18 acts. Returns, displays, challans, payments, remittances, renewals, all of these are examples of compliances. And by no means I'm saying this is a comprehensive list, but when we talk compliance, this is what we are referring to. Moving on, there are compliances at 3 levels in India: central, state, and local. Depending on whether an item is on the union list, state list, or concurrent list, that's where the compliances come from. There are 7 categories that we just spoke about, and there are 3 types: time-based, event-based, and checklisted compliance. So a compliance officer in India is dealing with this universe. Now let us see what does this translate into. Moving on to the next slide here, if you see, we have mapped the compliance burden across small, medium, and large size enterprise. And for a small company with a single plant and single HO, today deals with a minimum of 23 licenses, about 60 acts, about 750 compliances a year, with leading to about 120 filings. Folks, that translates into 1 filing every second business day. When we move from a small to a medium to a large company, you will see that these numbers multiply exponentially from about 750 compliances for a small company to about 5,500 for a medium-sized company, with about close to 10,000 compliances for a large-size setup. And these are conservative numbers, anonymized data. So as you can see, compliance management in India is non-trivial. It requires time and resources. It requires executive focus, attention. If you have to manage anywhere between 5 to 10,000 compliances, you are dealing with a fair bit of complexity. The age-old ways of ad hoc, paper-based, people-dependent compliance tactics don't work. One simple non-compliance episode can mean lockdowns, revocation of licenses and permissions, lakhs and lakhs of rupees of penalties, litigation which would have been avoidable. All of these things are a part of poor compliance management. So with this background, let's kick off the discussion today. We are 7 minutes into the conversation. The first portion of our discussion, we will predominantly focus on understanding from our 3 panelists today, Anusha, Anupama, and Priyanka, what are the compliance challenges from their experience. Now, Priyanka, unlike Anusha and Anupama, comes from a service provider background. So the beauty of that is he sees compliance and its complexity in action, not just in one customer, but over 100 customers coming from Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 as well. So Priyanka will bring a different perspective, and that's what makes this discussion very enriching. So Anusha, let me bring you into the conversation today. You come from HMD, you worked in some of the largest Indian and multinational companies with a fairly sizable presence, geographical spread between center and states. Let us hear from you. According to you, what are the key compliance challenges of operating in India? And what have you seen in the last 15 to 20 years of your experience in corporate India?
Thank you, Rishi. Thank you for having me as a part of this discussion this afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone. So first, I'll start with a disclaimer that surely whatever views I share here are absolutely my own professional views, and aren't the views of my organization, current or previous. So I would be compliant there. Start with the challenges, I think, right. So I think challenges, I would like to kind of categorize them into 2 parts. I would first talk about a couple of my experiences from an external challenges perspective, and then I'll probably touch upon some internal challenges. So I will take three examples which have kind of encountered in my professional space. I will start with the first one, which goes back a few years. A Fortune 50 company in the retail space had several allegations for having, paid thousands of small amounts of bribe in order to secure their real estate permits and their licenses. So, I mean, today, if you, not today, but if you go back a few years, if you wanted to set up a retail company or a retail store in India, that at a minimum, you have at least 50 licenses that one has to procure. And this just kind of goes up dependent on the state-wise nuances that are there. And what one has to encounter is an extremely long gestation period in order to put up a store. So construction aside, there are pre-construction permits, post-construction permits. There are permits in every space, whether it's contract labor or all your shops and establishments and trade-related licenses or your environment-related. So it's a mammoth task to kind of put up a retail store. So I think that is one experience that I would like to highlight, which is basically the complexity of doing business in India. So I think that's one. The next experience is more recent. So for example, I will touch upon the production linked incentive scheme that the government has rolled out, which is really a welcome move in this sector for mobile manufacturing companies. So for an organization such as ours, we don't exactly manufacture devices, okay? So what we do is we kind of tie up with ODMs or original device manufacturing companies from whom we procure. Now, what we need a submission here would be to have more clarity and visibility on what the scheme really is and how will it actually get implemented. So today, what we understand is, say, it's going to be an annual program, and the incentive or the settlement is going to happen post the completion of the year, and after an audit process and so on. So we need to have more clarity and more speed or agility in getting those settlements, so that we kind of build and bake it into our own plans. And what we kind of put out is prices which are more competitive, which was what was the intent of this program. So we kind of want to build that into our scheme of things. So I think that's the second example of compliance challenges. So the first was around the challenges around the regulatory environment itself. The second was a challenge around the visibility and the transparency in the process of compliance. So these were like external compliances. Now I will move to an example of an internal challenge, which is very, very recent. And I think all of us would be privy to such kind of challenges. In our current organization, what we did was we had put in a reasonably good rhythm of internal compliance. So we used to have regular monthly monitoring, tracking, reporting mechanisms. And where we kind of, we come 2020 March, and the pandemic just kind of hit us like a thunderbolt. And obviously the compliance kind of came to a standstill. Forget that, even business came to a standstill. And we being in the B2C space, instead of talking about inventory and cash and flows, we ended up talking about how do we manage our cash flows, how do we manage our vendors. We started looking into our contracts and seeing, okay, what can we do better in terms of our rental contracts? How can we kind of, save costs? Those were the kind of initiatives that we had to delve into. And here, while it was a challenge, it also had an equal opportunity or a learning for us, wherein we kind of went and looked up some of these. And for a compliance function, we actually had to go into a business partner mode with our business and identify areas so that we could kind of come out of it in a compliant way. So I think that was like an internal challenge we kind of encountered. So I think those would be the 3 or 4 thoughts I would like to leave you with, which is that firstly is that complexity of doing business in India is extremely high. Second would be that in whatever schemes we kind of come out with, we need to have absolute visibility and clarity, and we need to have speed and kind of giving us the benefits that kind of was intended to be. And third is that we need to be agile and respond to our business in a very, very timely way. So with that, I'll hand over the podium back to you, Rishi.
So very well said, Anushka. Thank you for bringing that perspective. Just to add to some of this, you're absolutely right that organizations need a lot of agility and nimbleness in responding to these unforeseen black swan kind of events. Just to share some data, regulatory compliance environment in India is highly fluid. In a typical year, we see about 4,000 plus regulatory changes. So typical year is 3,000 plus. This year, because of COVID, there has been an unusually large activity. And during the first 6 months of COVID, from 25th March till about 6 months, there were over 900 regulatory changes that corporate India had to deal with. A lot of them were applicable immediately. Government was responding to things as they were coming up, and corporate India had to respond back with measures, whether it was limited restrictions on mobility, number of people working out of offices, overtime regulations. People had to know that these regulations are changing and they had to accommodate. So absolutely well made points. Anupama, let me bring you into the conversation now. You are actually working for Bharat Serums. There's a lot of focus around COVID, and the entire world is watching for vaccines with a bated breath. I know Bharat Serums is not manufacturing COVID vaccines, but vaccine is vaccine, and there are a lot of regulations around vaccine manufacturing. That's what makes it a long and safe process. I want to bring you into the conversation for you to share with us your perspective on compliance management, the traditional ways, why they have become passé. What are the key challenges that you deal with playing the head of legal compliance and secretarial functions in the organization? Tell us more.
Thank you, Rishi, for inviting me for this discussion. Anusha has made really good points with regard to the compliance challenges that we are facing on a day-to-day basis. I would like to highlight, when it comes to biosimilars or pharmaceutical companies, my journey started with eMerck, where initially we had, I remember as a head of secretarial, I used to report into the head of finance, and we used to send out the compliance certificate, the list of compliances each of the departments had to manage. It was around, I think, 100 odd acts we used to really look at and send out this data. And now when I'm looking at it, it's each department has to look at around at least 50 to 60 acts. It's phenomenal. It's just grown like anything. It's very difficult for us to manage. Now, when it comes to, it was just a pharmaceutical company which was into formulations and APIs. You would look at Drugs and Cosmetics Act and the rules and 2-3 other acts, not much. But when it comes to biosimilars, it's completely different. We have to look at least 12 to 15 additional acts other than the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. It becomes so difficult. And we are talking about the recent research, last 2 years research. It was mentioned that by 2020, a biosimilar company, biopharmaceutical company will emerge at least, as a market leader and will have a $20 billion in sales. World over. But I see that so many regulations, it's so difficult to manage, and even if at all we are looking at research and all, those people should be left to do research, which should be, it's kind of an innovation, this kind of creative space. And we are looking at so many acts. It's making them understand all of this, it's become so difficult every time, when we go back to them. And then you'll find that, our company is into equine and all of those. Equine is like plasma removed from the horse's from body and all of that. So what happens is that even PETA will come out with some kind of questions, and then what happens is then they file a writ petition. We have to go after them and say, okay, then there are some rules and regulations which we have to follow basis those recommendations. So it's really becoming so difficult each day, and I can only say that these complexities can be reduced if at all we have the right technologies in our offices, to manage all of this internally and showcase to the board and to the stakeholders that we are compliant. So what I can say, every year I see the workload only increasing. It's not decreasing at all. And we'll have to, the company's focus is shifting, the priorities are shifting, the volatile risk landscape, all of this is creating a lot of stress, and to the legal teams and all, it's very difficult to manage. We foresee this increasing, not decreasing anytime, and it is possible only if at all we have the right technologies or the vendors who can provide these services to us. What I can only say that, I also find that a lot of disconnect between one department within the ministries and other departments. So why not everybody talk to each other, get the right acts for us, that we can look at. And if you look at in the Factories Act, or on the consent to operate for factories, you will find that there's a requirement in MPCB consent to operate. You will have to at least have minimum 33% of available open land under green coverage. But if you look at MIDC, you will find there's a total different this thing. They said that the total area of your plot, 33% of it should be open land, so open land or a green coverage. So it's difficult to interpret what you should be following, whether that it's a deliberate kind of this one, or it is happening because no ministries are talking to each other. So the lot of challenges we are facing on these issues. It's even for the biosimilar companies like us, if at all it is possible for the government to come and look at it, so that we just have 2 or 3 acts to follow, it would be a better this thing to manage, rather than if in each and every this thing we find that the challenges are increasing. It's not decreasing. It's difficult days. Yeah, this COVID-19, because of COVID-19, we are looking at a lot of things in a very different way today, and only technologies and people are sitting at a very different location today, and controlling them becomes a big challenge. So the only thing that we can look at technologies, enhanced technologies, and with the long-term objectives. That's what I would like to say here.
Sure. So points very well made, Anupama. Totally agree with you that the world of compliance is complex. I think it has always been complex. What has changed, in my opinion, over the last few years is the cost of non-compliance, right? Today, governments and agencies have a lot more teeth, lot more technology. Automatic notices are getting issued for non-compliance and delays. So this technology wasn't there with the government. So while the enforcement capabilities have gone up, cost of poor compliance has gone up, unfortunately, the compliance officers still continue to work the way they were working 30 years ago. They're using emails, they're using telephones, they're using regular phone calls in order to figure out what is happening with compliance. On one hand, they are getting beaten up by the board members who want assurance, who want transparency, who want reliability. Over the last 2 years, I don't know whether you know, the number of independent directors who have resigned, that number has become double.
Yeah.
Independent directors today are asking for greater transparency.
Of course.
They don't want to sign documents just on an anecdotal evidence of a compliance officer saying, don't worry, I'm compliant, we are compliant. They are saying, no, I don't trust your word. Show me how you are compliant.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That is a fundamental shift, and that's putting the onus squarely on compliance officers and the executives on putting processes.
When they are part of the day-to-day affairs, I wonder whether they are really independent with the real sense of it.
Well, these are some very important points, and thank you for bringing the perspective of how complex it is for a pharmaceutical company, and that certainly I hope that our audience has a slightly better understanding of what does it take for a vaccine manufacturer to do the research and biosimilars, and how does it all come together, and what are the implications on compliance environment in a company like that. So thank you so much for being here. We totally appreciate your time. I'll come back to you on your thoughts around the solutions. Let me now bring Priyanka into the conversation. Just like I said, unlike Anusha and Anupama, Priyanka comes from a service provider fraternity like Avantis, like myself. where he has a intimate understanding of what his customers go through, because that's what he solves every day. And a lot of these are multinational companies operating in India, and many of them are Fortune 100 and Fortune 500. Priyankan, welcome. Why don't I bring you in and you share your perspective on what you see from your vantage point on a day-to-day basis? What's worrying people in India on compliance?
Thank you, Rishi. Very glad to be a part of this discussion, and thank you for inviting me. You're right. I come from a similar or a vendor community or a solution provider community. So, I mean, we at Niyamo have been working with a lot of, as you say, major multinational brands and helping them standardize or transform their global HR and global payroll practices through technology-led solutions. And all of our work or practice that we do day in, day out deals and involves a lot of your employee-centric compliances, which is your labor law, taxations, health and safety to some extent, and so on. Now, and as such, I might sound a little bit biased because I may talk a little bit more about the labor compliance side of things, or the taxation and health and safety. And from our experience of being involved in designing a lot of this, transformation practices for large programs or multinationals, what we are seeing is when we design a common or harmonized solution, policies, practices, technology about saving HR data, or creating a common compensation program, etc. You always have the labor compliances or the payroll or the taxation compliances at heart when you do so. And every major national multinational actually has a presence in one of the BRICS countries, India, or majorly India or China. Of course, maybe because it gives them scale, talent pool, cost efficiency, and many other things, right? But one thing that is always evident in all of the BRICS countries is, and that is glaringly visible, is the complexity of managing compliances in all of the BRICS countries. Maybe because of our size, maybe because of the number of states, provinces in China, and so on. As you rightly said, over 1,500 acts and 70,000 plus compliances, and between 600 to 1,000 changes. It's not easy. So while this is true, all of these nations are also seen moving towards or trying to move towards simplified compliances as well. Brazil actually tried to do something called an e-social, but actually, in my opinion, they made it more complex because now every organization has to submit some 53 XML files of every employee. That stuff. Whereas countries like Australia and Singapore, and they are in the top of business, ease of doing business, as Anusha rightly mentioned. Singapore is in number 2, and these countries also has the same legacy as we do of a lot of old laws and compliances, but they have been able to transform all of this into simplified versions. India now is taking a lot of these efforts actually. In fact, our ease of business index has actually risen by 14, I think, and is now at 63rd, which is still bad. We have miles to go, but we are moving. And the recent change, where a lot of this labor acts and has actually been merged into 4 labor codes. And I know Rishi had done a great job in putting a document together on that. But this act actually is going to simplify things. So there's definitely an effort towards simplifying things, but we are not there yet at all. So now if I have to talk about specific challenges that I see, not only from my organization perspective, that I see in my customers when I deal with them, and I can broadly classify them based on my observation into 3 broad categories. And I'm not going to repeat the ones that Anusha and you guys have spoken about, but primarily if I categorize them into people, process, and technology. First of all, I think in the people segment, yeah, even today, a lot of large traditional organizations are very people dependent when it comes to managing their compliances. You may be the most efficient or knowledgeable guy and you may have a lot of knowledge of how things work and how to get things done and how to stay compliant. And you may have a right hand guy who does it for you. But end of the day, it is extremely people dependent, and anything that has been prominent this year is uncertainty. You lose one of your most important critical guy who does it for you, who knows things or maybe he leaves the organization and you have to search for somebody else. You don't get skilled professionals who knows everything very easily. So there's a lot of people dependency, and at the same time, to make matters worse, there is a lack of adequate training or education first, and people actually learn it from experience. You cannot actually bring someone fresh and expect him to manage your compliances. No, that will take years. So there's a lot of people dependency, and that's a risk for all organizations. And at the same time, there, even for the old seasoned guys, we see what we call as the resistance to change as well. You may bring in a extremely nice technology of how to manage things, compliances, how to bring in alerts, how to manage governance, etc. But that one formula in one Excel sheet makes them cling to it. So actually, there is a need of change in not just the government simplifying things, but in our own outlook from the industry within as well. Likewise, technology. Today there is not a single technology or single place where all of these changing acts, etc., are available. There are, I believe, about 2,000 plus places where you will actually get acts and compliances. And in the same way, if I have to talk about technology within our organizations, we don't really have, a single systems connected to each other. And again, if I speak about labor compliances, and ideally we could have had a compliance technology which can integrate with your HR system, where the employee is created, and the downstream can be integrated with your government sites for all your registration, deregistration, tax filing, and so on. But we don't have it. Systems and technologies are broken, which I think we need to make it simplified and make them connected, so that end of the day, maybe in 5 years, 10 years, we have one click and it's a seamless program, right? Then again, I think we need to give a significant more importance to data privacy in compliances as well. With the pandemic, a lot of people are working from home and all of the folders and different critical documents have become accessible. So the importance of confidentiality and integrity, is more of seeming like paperwork. So I think that's something that has to be given importance as well. Now coming back to the process, I think compliance is still seen as more of a functioning organization where you have a problem and you go to it, and not as an enabler for your strategic business. I mean, organizations wants to do a rapid market expansions, and there's change in the business model as well. I mean, 10 years ago, nobody knew that you could actually have an app to order food, order taxi, and order your hotels and everything. But with it, the changing regulations, you don't know where to stand. And this is where compliance function has to be an enabler. But unfortunately, there is a lack of centralized view or in every organization. HR compliances works in silos, legal works in silos, finance works in silos, but you don't know where the cost of non-compliance can actually hit you. It will do a surgical strike, and we end up in paying a huge amount of money. Likewise, being up to date is always a challenge, and I think everyone has to believe not in one source, like Rishi rightly said, not on the compliance officer that I'm compliant. Everyone has to believe in multiple sources and then take a decision, which I think is still a challenge because we are not yet there in terms of using the solution digitally. So that's my quick view, and maybe we can talk more as we go along. Back to you, Rishi.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Excellent views. Totally agree with you on the technology, the adoption, willingness to change. And Priyankan, I share a very common experience where technology enablement is less about technology and more about behavioral and organizational changes. So that is certainly something. This is a long journey. People often think they can bring in a software and the software will solve the world's hunger problems. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Software is an enabler. A number of Indian organizations are of the view that if I bring the software, I should be able to fire people because otherwise the software has no use. And I often tell them that if you bring Tally, will you fire the accountant, right? Tally makes an accountant smarter. It enables an accountant to move from lower end data entry functions to higher end analytics, reporting, financial planning function. Software in compliance also does something similar. So don't expect to fire people when you bring on a software. It will make people smarter. So that's a point well made on technology. On the process front, Priyanka, totally agree. Most organizations, and we work with thousands of organizations in India, over the years, I've had the unique privilege of talking to executives, board members, compliance officers, and in a single voice, I can tell you, and I echo the sentiment of most of the executives, no MBA course in this country, including the one at IIM, I went to an IIM Calcutta, I know that, teaches anything on compliance. So while they teach you business management, but understanding of the regulatory framework of India, understanding of compliance and how to stay compliant, governance risk practices, we have a long way to go from that education perspective. So you're absolutely right. People learn on the job, and they make mistakes, many mistakes before they learn. Some of them can be fatal. So that's another one. And since cost of compliance, non-compliance has gone up, more and more organizations believe that they can't afford these incidents or accidents, if you will. So let's come to the next section of our discussion. Some really insightful thoughts coming from Anusha, Anupama, and Priyanka around their perspectives of challenges of compliance management in India. We will talk more on what can be done, what they have done from their experience to manage these challenges, what kind of technologies, tools, tips, tricks, behavioral changes that they have used in their organizations. But before that, I would like you to look at our poll. We have a short poll to capture our audience view. This is the time to bring our audience into this engagement, into this discussion. We would like to capture their view on some of these challenges. There are a few short questions. It takes about 1 minute to respond. I would request all our panelists also to take a stab at responding to these questions. We'll keep the survey open for another 40 seconds. Another 20 seconds. Anyone who is not taken, I request them to submit the answers now. Okay, another 10 seconds and we wrap up the poll. Abhay, go ahead and stop the poll now. So we will view the results of this poll before we wrap up. It is 3:40, 3:38 to be precise. Let me move on to the next portion of our discussion today. Before I move on, this is a quick request to the audience. There is a Q&A box that you will see on your screen at the lower right-hand corner. Please use that to post specific questions. If you would like one of our panelists to answer that question, please mention who is it directed at, and we will pick up these questions towards the end of our conversation in another 10-15 minutes. So coming back, Anusha, back to you. We have challenges. That's the reality of life. These challenges are not going anywhere anytime soon. So while I can see from my vantage point working with various ministries and departments today that there is great intent, and we are heading in the right direction. Labor codes, codification of 29 Central Labor Acts into 4 codes is commendable. This is the first real overhaul of labor laws in the last 73 years after independence. So I think we are making some serious reforms. Education is going through that, farms are going through that, a number of items are going through reforms. What are you doing? What are your views that our audience should take up? Some tips, some tricks, some suggestions on what have you done to stay compliant? How do you manage it in your organization?
Right. So thanks, Rishi. So I think basically I kind of followed 3 or 4 key mantras on how to kind of manage compliance. I think I'll start with the first, which is basically I think having an engaging, a continuing dialogue with the management and the senior leadership on compliance itself. This helps us identify which are our key risks, which are our upcoming risks, such that we are able to partner with the business and understand whether we are going the right way. So I think that's one key thing. And this, along with our regular mechanism of measuring, monitoring, and reporting compliances, we also take it to the next level. So for example, we have sessions with the leadership teams every month, telling them about what our compliances look like, what our scorecards look like. So here we are not only talking about external, but about internal compliances as well. But we do that on a very regular and periodic basis. So in terms of need to re-emphasize on compliance, we talk about it in town halls. We ask, so for example, when we do our trainings, we ask our CEO or the India VP to speak about the need for the policy to be compliant with anything from anti-bribery to anti-corruption. We need to re-emphasize those elements. So that's one way that we do it. Now I'll take a small example. So here with so this time during the pandemic, there was a new kind of a nature of transaction that we came up with. We started doing work around with a third party on government bidding. Now, so in this situation, we needed to be compliant and ensure that we need to do our due diligences, and we ensure that whatever third parties we work with, we do those due diligences right. So what we did was that there we kind of had to wear the hat of a business partner. So we kind of switched between that of being a business partner versus being a monitoring team, and hence we have to kind of have all those collaborative elements kind of support the business. Now there are situations where where a compliance team can merely be like a rubber stamp, but that's not the way I think would be the way forward. So I think organizations are as effective, the culture of compliance in organizations are as effective as the tone at the top. That's the first and the most important mantra as far as I'm concerned on compliance. So I think that's the first one. The second one would have 2 sub-elements. Yeah.
Our discussion today, we are trying to evaluate the impact of technology on compliance management.
Right.
What are your views on that?
Yeah, so I'm coming to that. So I think the second one was around like the very theme of our conversation today, which is on automation. So I think we are a relatively newer organization, kind of 4 years since we started off. So we are still taking baby steps in that direction, I would say. So I think, but however, like I think, for example, now we have recently started realizing the need for it. And we have started, like we implemented the robotics tool for our closing processes. So I think there, and then we had to work together in order to identify what kind of controls needed to be fixed around those. So that I think is an important element. The second important element is today, like Priyanka rightly said, we have our functions kind of working in silos as far as their compliances are concerned. And we don't have a tool which kind of evaluates completeness of what we are doing. So while they're working in their silos and we probably have audits which pick up what the exceptions look like, we don't have a tool which kind of is an overarching thing and which gives comfort to the management. So we are thinking seriously in that direction, and we are not yet there probably, but I mean, it's very much the management is well aware that there is really a requirement there. So I think that's one thing we are doing. And I think the other element there would be around simplification and back to basics. So I think that's one element wherein you simplify processes, simplify systems in such a way that we can and work in a compliant and an efficient way. So I'll give you a small example. When we kind of started off, we had this contracting process, and all our contracts, all our approvals had multi-level approvals. We had to go all the way up to global and take all our approvals. So we needed to simplify that and push them to say that, okay, we need to delegate more and have more simpler approval matrices. So this is similar to, say, a complex governmental regulation in India. So we kind of work in that direction towards simplification and back to basics. The third element that I think I would like to talk about is the compliance. Basically, I think we need to balance the cost of compliance. So I'll take this up with a personal anecdote actually. So we are a family of 4, and the place where I live in Delhi is basically, we don't get water very regularly, in the sense every day we have an hour to kind of fill up our tanks. My husband is a bit paranoid about this, and he kind of he's been around at home, so it's been okay. But once he started going back to work, the other day he was telling me that you should put it off in half an hour. And I have 2 adorable daughters, and he told them as well. So I had like 3 reminders over the course of the next half an hour to put it off, and I was all done and dusted. And then I got a 4th reminder on my WhatsApp saying that, have you done it? So surely I need more digitization there, but this is also an example of over compliance. So there are organizations like MNCs where there could be a possibility of over compliance. So I think somewhere we need to balance compliance itself and the cost of it. So I know organizations which have 40 people in their compliance functions, and still I don't think they would be able to do 100% of it. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. Now I'll give you an example of how we kind of have been trying to work in those environments. So we have a compliance that we need to do around e-waste management. This is a fairly critical compliance for a mobile company, wherein we have an annual target that we need to kind of collect back. And invariably, in our kind of a situation, we are not able to collect back from through our take back programs as much as the target, and hence we have to kind of work with a e-waste collector who would help us do the compliance. Now, what happens is, so what we have done here in our company is that we've put together a cross-functional team. So one option is to have a team who would just work on e-waste compliances. We said that we couldn't have afforded it. So what we did is that we kind of put together a cross-functional team, which consists of people from finance, legal, compliance, inventory management, and we kind of together work on this compliance. It's like a cross-functional team. So some aspects such as in-housing, some aspects such as de-risking ourselves, we have to see how to work on them. We have to work on the 80-20 rule, because I don't think 100% compliance is possible. Having said that, we need, as you're rightly saying, we can't afford the big liabilities either. So I think that fine balance is something that we need to strike. So I think those are my thoughts. Over to you, Rishi.
Excellent. So, well, thoughts well made. Without digitization, managing compliances in an ad hoc paper-based environment is risky. There can be non-compliances, there can be inadvertent misses, there can be delays which could have been avoidable, just like the reminder example that you said. Since there is paranoia around missing it, that's why there are reminders. Today,
absolutely,
most organizations don't have any reminders. Their license would expire, they won't remember to file a renewal application, they would have missed the date for return. A year would have gone by, suddenly they would have received a notice and realized that we missed the last year's return. So points well made, Anusha. Thank you so much. Let me bring you, Anupama, into the conversation. How do you think technology is going to transform all of this, including all the regulatory updates, thousands of them in a year, and at least a few hundred of them that affect you? What are your views around how you have managed it, would want to manage it? How is digitization changing this game?
Yeah, For me, what has happened here, this is recently acquired by Advent. So it's a clean slate for me because I have to look at all the compliances and all, whether it has been adhered to in the past, at least for the last 1 year, and going forward, how we are going to put this across. So in the past, from my past experiences, I can say that, how did we manage it? We had good technology. It was an inbuilt technology in my past organization. And we had a lot of law firms who would provide continuous updates, which were then included in the compliance portal. And the function owners across the organizations were mapped into it. They would go into the portal and then manage those. In fact, they would update whether the compliances are in place or how they have managed it, whether there's a delay, and automatically all of that information would come back to the general counsel, and then a dashboard would be created, which would be sent across to the CFO and the CEO. That's how we manage the technology side of it, through the technological intervention. Having said that, it's always, as Anusha mentioned, it's the tone at the top which is really important. No nonsense to non-compliance is something that everybody should be aware of, and the CEO or the senior management should ensure that they send that message across to the whole ecosystem within the organization. So that's how it is possible. And another thing is that currently what I feel is that because people are working from different places, it's important. It's very difficult. It was in a controlled environment earlier. Now there is completely, people are in a different zones, and it's very difficult to manage. So that is the reason we should, instead of having a stricter warning or some kind of thing, it's better to reward them and make them get the compliances adhere to, rather than telling them with a stick. That's what is my thought. Rewarding is the better option rather than warnings or any kind of stricter. That's my thought on it.
So from a behavior point of view, you made some very interesting points. And, compliance is all about changing behaviors, right?
Yes.
Oftentimes, and somebody has said it and I'm repeating it, sunlight is the biggest disinfectant, right? So when you put a spotlight on anything, it starts improving because people start to pay attention to it. In the traditional mode, management, while they're accountable to the board for compliance, they're accountable to regulator for certifying compliance with the law of the land, there are hardly any transparent and accountable systems available. In their management meetings, they don't spend any time talking about compliance statuses. When they don't spend time, their functional heads and their next level heads, they don't pay enough attention to it. Suddenly it becomes a compliance officer's responsibility to put together a report of non-compliance and bear the brunt of penalties arising out of non-compliance. So I think...
But I see that scenario changing recently because everybody is aware how difficult it is, especially the reputational risk, or penalties aside, the reputational risk is something that companies are aware about, and they are very scared about it. Anything that would hamper or their reputation, they will never would like to get into such type of situation. So that is where this scenario is.
And that's where digital systems are helping. There are dashboards which are updated real time. There are mobile apps which give you the idea of non-compliance. When you need to know it, it tells you where the interventions are required. There is a risk classification of applicable compliances. And all of this empowers management to make the right interventions and the right decisions. Now they are able to actually link compliance statuses to people's goals. And that's what has started helping improve the compliance culture of the organization. So, in my discussions with management, I often tell them there is no magic wand which you will wield one fine morning. An organization will move from the current state to being completely compliant. It's a journey.
Of course.
Digitization tools, they bring in the transparency, accountability, timeliness, and traceability. But at the same time, tone at the top, discussion in your management meetings, linking goals to compliance statuses. These are all practices that need to be brought in. Now, we have only a few minutes left into the conversation. And in the meantime, I do request the panelists to start looking at the questions that are already there. A number of questions have come in. So while Priyankan comes in, I do request Anusha and Anupama to take a look at the questions, and the moment Priyankan is done, we will start responding to those. Over to you, Priyankan.
I think if I have to talk about solution of what I see as best practices, and I'll probably relate to the challenges that I talked about. I think technology is key, of course. Going digitalization is of course there. But before that, I think organizations, and I don't see a lot of organizations doing it today, but I'm sure many will move towards is having a effective what we call as a corporate compliance program. One that manages your risk and one that manages or governs the entire compliance management function through exceptions. And by that, I mean using a technology that allows you or a senior executive manager or a compliance controller or a senior guy to actually manage your compliances through exceptions where he or she does not really need to focus on transactional items at all. Today, a lot of senior executives are actually seen managing compliances, relying on people, relying on tracking dates, and actually looking at the challans and proofs and then taking signatures. But I think a lot of it can actually be done away by using bots, artificial intelligence for transaction and tracking, so that they can focus more on strategy and governance. And that still is long way to go in many organizations, which I think we should, foster more and more. Of course, I mean, speaking about it, we live in an age where school kids are learning coding now. If we don't embrace digital transformation to simplify our compliance and regulatory space, our next generation, 2 decades later, are going to feel like starting in stone. So it has to start now. And a lot of, even in one of our questions, I think former questions, I was going through them, I realized that a lot of people, especially in the compliance side of things or in the internal support functions, including HR and so on, actually believes that digital transformation of compliance management is in the future. That's something that is coming up. But actually, that's not really true, because that means that you might be living in the past. It is actually happening right now as we speak. Digital transformation of all compliance management, be in any space, whether it is HR or industrial or health and safety. Maybe we are doing it in silos, but it is actually moving towards a digital era. So I think primarily, if I have to summarize in short, I think going digital is definitely on there. But apart from that, if you have to rely on a simple best practice and a thumb rule that we found it very useful is having a triangulated framework of compliance management actually. And when I say triangulated, it means you having a in-house expert or a team who tracks different things. You can have a technology or an advisor who tells you what to do, and you relying on third-party publications or subscriptions which tells you things. If all three are telling you the same story, you know that you are going in the right track. If there is one twist, that have you double check. But end of the day, I think if all three can be done through a platform or a technology where you can check your alerts, your status of compliance, how many issues are open, how many are closed, what is coming up next month, do we have people to do it, what are the new changes that has come in my area, in this state, in this location, in my industry, and if you get all in one place, then I think that's where you need to opt for ongoing for.
Excellent. Well, Priyankan, thank you so much. I would want to give some comments on that, but we have only 3 more minutes left into the conversations, and there are a few open questions. Let me quickly prioritize the questions. The first one is from Dr. Muktak Vyas. He has asked, what could be the possible legal issues that may affect non-compliance of any rule or policy? Why some people walk freely even after not complying? I'll probably try and answer this question. Dr. Vyas, thank you so much for participating and asking this question. That 69,233 compliances that are there in India, there are 26,134 which have provisions for criminal proceedings in jail term. Then there are a lot of others where you could lose licenses, registrations, there are financial penalties, some fixed, some variable with max and min, and so on and so forth. So every act and compliance is classified based on the penalty into various kinds of risk. That's part one. not all non-compliances will lead to the same penalties. Different laws and different non-compliances have different penalties associated. Part one. Part two, not everybody receives notice because government is not issuing notices automatically right now in majority of the departments. In some they are, but in majority it is on a sampling basis. So it's possible that you may be non-compliant and you've been lucky for some time because the notice has not been issued. Or once a notice has been issued in one department and documents have come out, then they've started scrutinizing, they are finding non-compliances of various different kinds. So that's one of the primary reasons. And then there are other reasons. In India, there are a lot of physical interactions between the inspector and the organization, and there are discussions and dealings that have been known to happen, and those are some of the other reasons why different non-compliances can be dealt with differently. So I think that's my view. Anupama, Priyankan, Anusha, any additional comments on this?
No, I think you have covered it right, Rishi.
Yeah, agree with you, Rishi.
Then Kaladindi has asked a question, what are the implications and status of NCLT HAT? Does anybody want to answer that? She has two questions. One was this and second was, what are the current implications and status of NCLT processes pre 31/12/2020 and post 31/12/2020? Anybody who wants to take that? What is changing on 31/12 that Kaladindi is referring to? There's a question from SG Raman. Don't you think monitoring compliances of our business associates and OEM manufacturers is also important? Recent instance of erosion in manufacturing unit of Apple had made Apple to investigate OEM manufacturer. So I think I'll push this question to Anusha. You come from an environment where you're dealing with vendors and manufacturers. You do a lot of contract manufacturing and so on. So you're best positioned to answer this.
Sure. I think that's a process that it kind of there have been instances in my experience where we need to ensure that the third parties whom we are working with are as compliant as we are, and we need to institute processes to ensure that they are in compliance, so that we kind of cover ourselves from legal as well as reputational risks that Anupama was rightly referring to. So this has happened in the past where retail companies were kind of having issues in Bangladesh, where where factories were not following labor laws. And similarly, I mean, I think the current instance of Winstron and Apple, I think, could be quite similar. However, in the current case, as what I was reading, probably even the employees have not gone back to even the labor officer claiming that that we are not in compliance. So I think those elements will have to be considered. But having said that, I think we need to kind of ensure that the third parties whom we are working with are compliant, and we need to regularly conduct audits, due diligence, check mechanisms to ensure that they are compliant. This would kind of extend even up to their factories. And I think organizations are instituting those processes very effectively. The larger the organization, the higher the risk, and MNCs do kind of put in controls around this.
So I would just add on to that. Years ago, way back in 1995, one of the largest sports goods maker in the world came into the limelight for all the wrong reasons, because there was a photograph published of a young boy somewhere in Pakistan doing something with a football. And suddenly this whole issue of child labor came into the picture. They had to do a lot of damage control worldwide. There was huge repercussions on the brand and so on. So the point that I'm making here is, when you outsource your manufacturing, you are outsourcing only the job. There are a lot of compliances that are still your responsibility as a principal employer. And the long and short of the story is, you need to make sure that you have processes and systems and expertise in place to know what your contract manufacturers are doing, whether they are paying ESI, PF, and so on, whether they are paying minimum wages. I think Anupama wants to come in. Go ahead, Anupama.
Modern Slavery Act, which has been, I think since the last 2 years, they have promulgated it. So it's the effect of that is to other countries also, wherever they are outsourcing their work, So we'll have to, in case we are outsourcing from India and supporting some business in UK, we'll have to ensure that our third-party vendors also provide that confirmation that they are not using child labor and all of that. So it's very stringent. It's not that, you just look at the Indian regulations and say, if at all you are providing any services across the globe, then you will have to ensure that you abide by those regulations too. So the world is really becoming complex, and it's very difficult to manage all these at the same time.
On a side note, companies like Avantis do provide these as services for vendor audits, because principal employers a lot of times do not have the bandwidth or the capability or the experience to audit third-party vendors who they leverage for their services. So companies like Avantis are there to provide these services as well.
Good to know. I will catch up with you on this part later.
I think we are 4 minutes past the time. I did want to thank all of you panelists. I really appreciate you taking the time. As a company, we are committed to the space and changing the way India does compliance. Your views, the best practices that you share, the knowledge of compliance, hands-on experience that you bring is really appreciated. A number of our audience, they take tips and tricks from here, which they introduce in their day-to-day working. And a lot of them reach out to us after that, thanking you as panelists. So thank you for taking the time. Audience, as always, you've been great, fully engaged. I still see over 100 people are still logged in, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, even after our planned time. So thank you very much. I look forward to our next session sometime in the middle of January, and we'll continue to talk about compliance conversations. In the meantime, if you do have questions for our panelists that we have not had an opportunity to talk today, please send them to us, and we will help our panelists get answers to them and pass them along. This is a journey. This is not a destination. We learn from you, gain from your experience, and we're using some of this to enrich our products and services out there. So thank you so much, audience and panelists, and hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.